Let me ask you a question, one that few dare to confront in public, let alone from the pulpit. What if the very act you believed was drawing you closer to God was actually separating you from Him? What if the offering you drop in the plate every Sunday out of guilt, out of habit, or out of pressure wasn't making you holy but making you blind? We've been taught to believe that tithing is an obligation, that it's a command from heaven, that to give 10% of our income is the measure of our righteousness. But let me challenge you with a radical thought. Tithing, in the way many practice it today, can be a sin. Yes, I said it. And no, I'm not here to strip you of generosity. I'm here to free you from spiritual manipulation, because faith, real faith, the kind that moves mountains and shapes destiny, does not operate on transactions. It operates on transformation. And if you want to step into a life of true power, uncheckable peace, and divine purpose, you must first question everything that enslaves your conscience, even if it comes wrapped in religious tradition. Let's dig in. Keynote 1. The law was fulfilled, not repackaged for profit. You must begin with clarity. To understand the truth about tithing, we have to understand its origin, its purpose, and how it was ultimately transcended by something much greater. Tithing, in its original biblical context, was never meant to be a universal eternal commandment, applied mechanically across all cultures and generations. It was a covenantal obligation, deeply tied to a specific time, people, and priesthood. It was part of a system that no longer stands. In the Old Testament, the tithe was instituted under Mosaic law, a means to support the Levitical priesthood. These priests had no inheritance of land or wealth. Their sustenance came through the tithes of the other tribes of Israel. That tithe wasn't just money, it was livestock, crops, oil, and grain. It was a way of redistributing goods in an agricultural society. It was not a formula for personal blessing, it was a civic and spiritual responsibility under the law. But here's what most people miss: the law was temporary. It was a shadow pointing to something greater. When Christ came, He did not come to extend the law, He came to fulfill it. Fulfillment is not the same as continuation. When a contract is fulfilled, it doesn't get renewed. It is satisfied, complete, over. To insist on tithing today at a legal obligation is to take what was fulfilled and repackage it for religious profit. This is not just a misunderstanding. It's a distortion of grace. Many modern ministries will use verses from Malachi 3:10 to argue that withholding the tithe brings a curse, and that giving it will open the windows of heaven. But they rarely point out that Malachi was speaking to Israel under the Old Covenant during a time of covenantal disobedience. The people were neglecting the temple system that God had put in place for that specific season. It is not a universal prescription for modern believers. This misuse of Scripture creates a form of spiritual extortion. It teaches people that unless they pay up, they'll fall out of favor with God. It frames the divine-human relationship in transactional terms. You give money, you get blessing. But that's not faith. That's a cosmic vending machine. And it has nothing to do with the transformative power of grace. When Christ established the new covenant, He did so not to reinforce a system of law, but to replace it with relationship. He shifted the focus from external performance to internal transformation, from rule following to heart reshaping, from debt and duty to desire and devotion. So, what happens when you apply an old rule to a new reality? You get dissonance. You get frustration. You get people who give money out of fear rather than freedom. And worse, you create a power structure that uses the language of God to control behavior. Let this be clear. The manipulation of sacred Scripture for financial gain is not just a misunderstanding, it is a violation of spiritual trust. The law was fulfilled. It's time we stop dragging it into the present just because it's profitable to do so. The true principle of giving in the New Testament is rooted in voluntary generosity, not legalistic obligation. It is guided by the Spirit, not enforced by a rule book. Giving, when it comes from a transformed heart, becomes a joy, not a requirement. It becomes an act of love, not a tax. When you give freely, you step into alignment with a higher law, the law of abundance, the law of reciprocity, the law of spiritual freedom. But when you give under compulsion, driven by guilt, fear, or shame, you are no longer operating in faith. You are trying to buy security. You are trying to bribe God. And that's not how the kingdom of heaven works. The shocking truth is that much of what is taught about tithing today is not based on truth. It's based on tradition, fear, and financial systems that benefit from your ignorance. But once you see this, you are no longer a victim of religious pressure, you are empowered by spiritual truth. So, reject the lie that your righteousness is measured by a percentage, and remember that your relationship with the divine is not maintained through math, but through love, obedience, and inner transformation. Keynote 2. Giving must flow from love, not lotto. Live a life of spiritual power. You must understand this. Giving is not a legal obligation, it is a spiritual expression. It is not the law that activates miracles. It is love, It is not duty that changes lives. It is devotion. The root of spiritual giving is the motive, not the amount. When giving becomes an obligation rather than an opportunity, it loses its power. When you give because you're afraid of losing favor with God, you've missed the point entirely. Love never demands, it invites. And faith never coerces, it compels through truth. In the New Testament, the clearest teaching on giving comes not from a rule book, but from a heart check. The Apostle Paul said, "Each one must give, as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." That is the golden standard of spiritual giving: freely, joyfully, and intentionally. Notice what this kind of giving requires. It requires awareness, freedom, and alignment. You are no longer giving to meet a quota, you are giving to reflect the generosity that has already been poured into your life. But here's what happens when churches impose a tithe as law: they remove the heart from the act. People give to comply. They give because they're afraid not to. They give out of pressure, not out of passion, and the result is tragic. Their giving becomes hollow, a form without substance, a gesture without grace. True giving is not about 10%. It's about total surrender of your ego, your pride, and your need to control outcomes. When you give freely, from a place of love, you are not trying to buy favor, you are becoming a conduit of it. You're saying, "I am already blessed, and from that abundance, I choose to bless." That is real faith. That is real power. And let's be honest, many people give financially because it's easier than giving emotionally or spiritually. They tithe because it's a formula, it's safe, it's measurable. But God is not calling you to formulas, He's calling you to faith. You want to live a life that's prosperous. You want to walk in abundance, joy, and influence. Then align your giving with your transformation, not your tradition. Give because your heart is on fire, not because your pastor's voice is in your ear. Give because you're moved by compassion, not manipulated by fear. The most dangerous lie about tithing is that it creates a shortcut to blessing. It says, if you just give this much, you'll unlock favor. But favor is not for sale. It is the result of alignment: spiritual, emotional, and ethical. This means your energy, your time, your love, your forgiveness. These are forms of giving too, and in many cases, they are worth far more than any dollar amount. Yet few preach about those, because they can't be tracked or taxed. Here's a hard truth: some of the most generous people in the world are those who give quietly, consistently, and without applause. They give what they can, when they can, led by the Spirit, not driven by the system. They are free, and that freedom multiplies everything they touch. And some of the most bound people are those who give out of fear of being cursed. They may tithe every month, but their hearts are anxious, their motives unclear, and their relationship with God transactional. That is not generosity, that is survivalism disguised as spirituality. The choice is clear. Do you want to give from fear or from faith? Do you want to obey out of pressure or walk in love? When giving flows from love, you don't worry about the percentage. You're not calculating your way into heaven. You're partnering with the heart of God, and that is what brings joy, peace, and breakthrough. So tear down the walls of law, and let love build your spiritual economy. Give what moves you, give with awareness, give without fear. And watch as life itself gives back, not because you paid your dues, but because you aligned with a higher truth. Keynote 3. Abundance is rooted in consciousness, not compulsion. There's a principle more powerful than any law of man or religious institution: the principle of abundance rooted in conscious alignment with spiritual truth, the most enduring. Wealth, joy, peace, and prosperity, not born from ritual obligation, but from awareness and awakened understanding of who you are and the source from which all things flow. Let's make this absolutely clear. Abundance is not a reward for religious obedience. It is a natural result of right thinking. Too many have been conditioned to believe that if they do not tithe, their finances will collapse, their blessings will dry up, and heaven's gates will shut in their face. This creates a deep psychological trap. It installs a program in the mind that says, I am not safe unless I pay God. But the divine does not operate like a debt collector. The universe, created by an intelligent design far beyond our manipulation, responds to consciousness, not coercion. When you give out of fear, you plant a seed of lack, and you harvest more fear. When you give out of guilt, you water the root of shame, and you harvest anxiety. But when you give from conscious choice, knowing that you are connected to infinite source, you create a cycle of true abundance. The mind must be retrained. We must reject the concept that money is inherently spiritual only when it is filtered through a religious structure. That belief chains you to dependency. It says that you need a middleman to access divine favor, but you are already equipped, already approved, already abundant if only you could align with that truth. Your consciousness is the soil of your experience. Whatever belief you plant, grows. So, if you believe God blesses only those who tithe, guess what? Your mind will filter all of your experiences to reinforce that view. And if you ever withhold a tithe, your subconscious will punish you, even if reality does not. That is the destructive power of a deeply embedded false belief. It makes you the warden of your own prison. Here's the paradox. People tithe hoping to get rich, but in doing so they embrace the identity of someone who is afraid they'll never have enough. And that identity becomes the root system of all future results. True abundance flows when you drop the performance and return to presence. Ask yourself, not have I given 10%, but have I given from clarity, from gratitude, from the overflow of knowing I am blessed. One will trap you in legalism. The other will free you into divine flow. Now think carefully. How much money has passed through the hands of those who tithe every Sunday, but still live in fear? How many people give diligently yet suffer quietly in scarcity? That is because money cannot fix the internal belief system that created the fear in the first place. If you think you must give to get, you will always be negotiating with God. You'll never know peace. But if you realize you give because you are already taken care of, already loved, already accepted, you begin to give as a creator, not a beggar. Let us look at nature for proof. The sun does not shine because someone paid it. The trees do not bear fruit based on who gave the most. The river does not stop flowing to those who failed to tithe. Nature is generous because it is aligned with divine design, and so must you be. Shift your mindset. You do not tithe to get blessed, you give because you are blessed. You do not pay God, you reflect God. You do not owe a fee for being alive, you express gratitude by living generously in every area: time, energy, words, and, yes, finances, but only from joy, not compulsion. The wealthiest people in history spiritually and materially understood this. They mastered the inner world before ever trying to fix the outer. They didn't just give, they gave from alignment. They made giving an extension of their consciousness, not a line item on their religious checklist, and that's the difference. The new standard is this: give from abundance, not for abundance. So, reject the idea that God is holding your future ransom. Stop tying your spiritual identity to a number. Start thinking, speaking, and giving like someone who knows they're already wealthy in the things that matter. Because that, my friend, is when the floodgates open, not of heaven as some external vault, but of your own limitless potential. Keynote 4. Spiritual leadership must be built on integrity, not income. At the heart of this issue lies something deeper than theology. It's a matter of leadership integrity. If the shepherds guiding the flock do not walk in truth, then the entire structure collapses into manipulation, and what was meant to be sacred becomes transactional. Far too often, modern spiritual institutions, many with good intentions, have relied heavily on the tithing doctrine, not for spiritual reasons, but for economic survival. The problem arises when they cloak that necessity in theology and preach it as divine command, rather than admitting it is a chosen structure of support. And in doing so, they blur the line between voluntary support and spiritual obligation. What happens next is dangerous. People begin to associate their salvation, their favor, and their value with their giving habits. The pulpit becomes a pressure chamber, where the sermon ends with a sales pitch, and the offering plate becomes the measuring stick of one's faith. This is not spiritual leadership. This is spiritual merchandising. True leadership operates from integrity, not income. It seeks first to awaken people's minds, not their wallets. It speaks to their freedom, not their fears. It does not use scripture as leverage to extract money. It uses wisdom to inspire transformation. To lead with integrity means to teach people to think, not just to obey. It means to challenge the status quo when tradition begins to suffocate truth. It means acknowledging that the tithe was part of a system fulfilled, and to push it as law. Today is not only intellectually dishonest, it is spiritually negligent. Integrity in leadership says this: we trust in divine provision. We believe in the generosity of transformed hearts. We will not threaten people into giving, we will equip them to understand the power of giving freely. When leaders stop demanding and start developing, the whole culture changes. The atmosphere becomes one of joy, not judgment, of participation, not pressure. And that is when giving explodes, not just in money, but in service, creativity, community, and spirit. Many leaders fear that if they stop preaching tithing as a requirement, people will stop giving. But that fear reveals the core misunderstanding, that people give only when coerced. But humans give best when inspired, not intimidated. A movement, fueled by fear, will always collapse under its own weight. But a movement rooted in integrity will flourish because it's not built on control, but on conviction. Here's what must change. Spiritual leadership needs to move from survival-based messaging to vision-based leadership. The old question was, how do we keep the lights on? The new question must be, how do we awaken people to their highest potential? Once that shift is made, money will flow not as the goal, but as the byproduct of meaningful impact. People don't give to systems that enslave them, they give to visions that liberate them. When leaders walk in truth, people walk in freedom. When leaders teach from revelation, not repetition, people rise. They stop asking, "How much do I owe God?" and start asking, "How much more can I become?" Let us also remember, the early church grew not through financial formulas, but through spirit-filled relationships. There were no offering envelopes, no tithe tracking. They gave as each had need. They sold possessions to support each other, not because they had to, but because their hearts were lit with a fire that no law could create. That is the future of spiritual leadership, not a return to legalism, but a rebirth of integrity, a revival of authenticity, a renaissance of the kind of teaching that liberates minds and unleashes generosity not because it's demanded, but because it's undeniable. So, to all who lead, rise to a higher standard. Teach the full truth, not just the convenient part. Trust the power of transformation over the pressure of tradition. And know this: when you lead with integrity, income takes care of itself, always. Keynote 5. Generosity is a spiritual power, not a religious obligation. True generosity is not dictated by doctrine. It is not measured in percentages, tracked in ledgers, or confined to religious obligation. Generosity is a spiritual power, force that originates from the awakened soul, not from fear, guilt, or tradition. Here's the paradox most never consider. When giving becomes a duty, it loses its divinity. It is no longer an act of love, but a form of leverage. And in that moment, the spiritual value of the act collapses. What is left is ritual, routine, and ultimately resentment. You were not created to be a mechanical giver. You were created to be a conscious channel of abundance, a deliberate, joyful contributor to the world around you. And there is a vast difference between these two modes of giving. Look within and ask yourself, do I give because I fear what will happen if I don't? Or do I give because I'm overflowing with something too powerful to keep to myself? That distinction is the line between religion and revelation, between guilt and greatness. Religious systems often teach that tithing is mandatory, that it is the only way to secure God's favor. But think about this: can love be bought? Can spiritual grace be earned through currency? The answer is clear. No amount of money can purchase peace, wisdom, healing, or joy. These are fruits of spirit, not transactions at a celestial market. And, yet, billions of dollars are exchanged under the guise of mandatory giving. Not because people feel inspired, but because they feel indebted. Not because they are empowered, but because they are afraid. Now, understand this: there is nothing wrong with giving. In fact, giving is one of the highest acts of spiritual maturity. But it must be born from the right soil, the soil of internal abundance, not external obligation. Generosity is a reflection of how you see yourself and the world. Scarcity-minded people give sparingly, suspiciously, or not at all. They operate from the belief that there's never enough. But abundant-minded people, they give freely, joyfully, and frequently, not to manipulate outcomes, but because their inner cup is full. In every major spiritual tradition, the act of giving was sacred when it was voluntary, intentional, and connected to purpose. It was never about appeasing a deity or securing a blessing. It was about participating in the expansion of life. It was about unity, not control, and that's the lesson we must reclaim. Giving is not about appeasing God, it's about aligning with good. When you give from inspiration, you activate the law of circulation. You send a signal to the universe that you are not a victim of lack, but a vessel of wealth. That wealth may be financial, emotional, spiritual, or relational, but it flows, multiplies, and returns when given with clarity and joy. There's a reason so many who tithe religiously remain financially stuck. It's not because the tithe isn't working, it's because their belief system is broken. They tithe from fear. They give while believing that their worth depends on it. They offer out of a mindset of not enough, and so that becomes their reality. True spiritual giving, on the other hand, liberates. It removes pressure. It opens the heart. And when the heart opens, new channels of opportunity, income, and influence begin to emerge, not as magic, but as the natural result of elevated thinking. Do not let anyone define your generosity for you. Do not surrender your giving to ancient laws misapplied to modern times. Instead, take back the spiritual authority to give from truth, not tradition, from purpose, not pressure, from vision, not fear. You do not need a pastor, priest, or prophet to tell you how to be generous. You need only look within and ask, what can I joyfully give today that reflects who I am becoming? That question, asked sincerely, will unlock more abundance than 10,000 sermons on tithing ever could. The most generous souls in history were not religiously obedient, they were radically free. They gave from purpose, they gave from love, and because of that, they changed the world. So don't settle for obligation. Step into the power of conscious generosity. Give because you can. Give because it reflects the abundance within you. Give because you are free, not because you are forced. Keynote 6. The new covenant of grace cancels the old contract of tithing. It's time we confront a powerful truth that many fear to say out loud. The Old Testament tithe was part of an old contract, a legal system between ancient Israel and God. That contract has been fulfilled. It is no longer in effect. Continuing to demand tithes under the new covenant is like trying to pay for something that's already been gifted to you. In ancient times, the tithe was not optional. It was part of a legal agreement. God told the Israelites, "Obey these laws, and I will bless you. Break these laws, and there will be consequences." The tithe, under that agreement, was a temple tax, a way to fund the priesthood, maintain the temple, and care for widows and orphans. It was a part of a larger legal system with over 600 rules. But here's what most people miss. When the new covenant was established through Christ, the old legal system was fulfilled, completed, and replaced. It was not edited. It was not continued. In part, it was ended. The message of the new covenant is radical. You are now under grace, not law. You are not saved by performance. You are not blessed by payment. You are accepted by faith, empowered by Spirit, and transformed by love. Why, then, do so many religious institutions still preach tithing as law? The answer is uncomfortable, because law is easier to control than love. Law is predictable, it's measurable. It gives leaders the illusion of certainty, but love is wild, love is free. Love cannot be demanded, it must be awakened. Under grace, your life is no longer governed by what you owe God, but by what you know of God. You are not asked to follow rules, you are invited to walk in relationship. You are not judged by percentages, you are defined by purpose. And this changes everything. The new covenant does not command a tithe, it calls you into a lifestyle of generosity that goes far beyond money. It calls you to offer your heart, your time, your attention, your creativity, your passion. It does not say, give 10% to meet the standard. It says, give your whole self, not out of duty, but out of desire. Imagine the shift this creates. Under the old covenant, people asked, how much must I give? Under the new covenant, they ask, how much more can I contribute? One is driven by fear, the other is fueled by love. This is not an attack on giving, it's a liberation of it. It's about reclaiming giving from the chains of ritual and restoring it to the throne of purpose. It's about moving from compulsion to creativity, from demand to desire, from the law of tithing to the law of grace. When you embrace this truth, guilt falls off you, fear evaporates. You no longer live trying to earn favor, you live knowing you already have it. And from that knowledge, you give freely, abundantly, strategically, and joyfully. You become a conscious steward of your resources, not because someone is watching, but because you are awake to the power of your own influence. And here's the most beautiful part. When people give under grace, they give more than they ever did under law. Why? Because their giving is no longer filtered through anxiety, it is inspired by love. And love never gives less, it always gives more. So let the old contract go. It served its time, it had its purpose. But it is finished. You are not under law, you are not under tithing. You are under grace. And grace doesn't ask, what do you owe? It whispers, what can you become?